Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world where nightfall isn't just a vibe, it's a warning. The sun's barely dipped behind the crooked rooftops and already the streets are emptying like someone flipped a switch. You're standing at the wooden threshold of your timber-framed home, staring down the last rays of amber light as they claw at the cobblestones. Chickens are roosting, merchants are slamming shutters with a bit too much force. Somewhere, a black cat darts across the alley, as if it knows something you don't. You pull the door shut hard. A clunky iron bar drops into place. One bolt, two. Maybe you wedge that broom against it for good measure. You know better than to trust luck. The dark in this town isn't just absence of sun. It's where the rules slip, where things whisper, and sometimes scream. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your city and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not sleeping yet. Too much to do before you can close your eyes and hope nothing clawed its way under the door. You light the rushlighter, poor man's candle, barely thicker than a chicken bone and about as smoky. It casts a thin glow across your one-room home, turning every shadow into a possible face. You glance at your pallet, the coarse wool blankets, and the dry crust of bread you didn't finish earlier. You'll save it, just in case you wake up starving. Again, you're not rich. That much is obvious. The air smells like smoke, sweat, and cabbage from your neighbor's hearth. Someone coughs in the room next door deep, wet, a cough that's lingered for weeks. You wrap your shawl tighter, the cold's already creeping in. And now you wait. This is the part modern people never quite get. Night isn't relaxing. It's the longest test of patience. You can't really do anything. There's no Netflix to binge, no fridge to raid. If you're lucky, you have a bit of sewing or mending to finish by firelight. If you're really lucky, someone with decent teeth will sing a tune low enough that the night watch doesn't come banging on the door. Historians still argue whether most medieval folks actually feared the dark or simply respected it as part of life. But what's certain is that once the sun went down, danger wasn't just outside, it was the outside. Thieves, drunkards, wolves, and worse things prowled the black. Even the church admitted the devil favored after-hours work. You think about lighting another taper, but the wax is precious, and you need to make it last through the week. Instead, you stare at the tiny flames and try not to blink too hard, or you'll see something shift in the corner. A fun fact, the idea of bedtime didn't really exist the way we know it. People often slept in two shifts, separated by an hour or two of semi-conscious wakefulness, some praying, some whispering, some doing other things. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Your immune system, not ready for the rats or the mold in your wall. But back to you. You might fiddle with a wooden charm your mother gave you, something carved to keep spirits away. You whisper a line of a prayer, or maybe a rhyme you half remember from childhood. Something about silver bells and black dogs. You're not sure if it's sacred or superstitious. Doesn't matter. You're hedging your bets. Outside you hear the faint thud of the city's main gate closing. That's it. The final seal. If you're not inside the walls now, you're on your own. And the wolves don't knock. And yet, it's not all dread. There's a strange peace to it too. The silence, if it holds, lets you hear things your daytime mind can't. The creak of the timbers, the slow rhythm of your breath, the way your heart finally settles into its nighttime pace. You lie back, eyes open, and listen for anything out of place. Because in the medieval night, sleep isn't a right, it's something you earn or survive. The gate slams shut behind the last merchant's cart, with a deep, metallic clang that rattles the shutters on your window. You flinch a little, not because you weren't expecting it, but because no matter how often you hear it, it always feels so final. Out there, beyond the wall, the countryside turns feral after sunset. Not the poetic kind of feral, the kind with highwaymen, wolves, and peasants desperate enough to kill for a crust of bread. Inside the walls, at least, there's structure. Guards, neighbours. A chance of making it to morning. You shuffle over to the window and lift the corner of the cloth hung over the frame. Outside, shadows bleed across the street like spilled ink. The torches along the outer wall flicker weakly. You can just make out the outline of the watchman as he begins his slow patrol halberd in hand, breath puffing into the chill. Hell call out the hour soon. Not with a clock, those are for cathedrals and fantasies, but with his voice. Something like 10 of the clock and all is well, assuming he isn't drunk or asleep in an alley. Curfews aren't suggestions, they're orders. City councils post strict regulations about when the gates close, when shops must shutter, and when residents are expected to be in their homes. Breaking curfew could earn you a fine, a night in the stocks, or if the watch is in a particularly bad mood, few bruises and your name in the town ledger. And if you're a foreigner or don't speak the local tongue well, good luck explaining. You step away from the window and let the cloth fall. Even looking out too long can invite suspicion. There are no blinds, no glass, just holes in the wood covered by scraps of fabric or animal hide. Some wealthier folks use horn windows, thinly shaved to let in light, but you don't have that kind of money lying around, or at all. Still, you're luckier than some. A cousin of yours lives just outside the city walls. He has to haul himself in by sunset each night or risk sleeping in the forest with nothing but a straw mat and a prayer. On festival days, he sometimes begs a gatekeeper to let him in late, bribing him with cheese or beer, but it's always a gamble. And once the gates are locked, not even nobles get special treatment, at least in theory. Money tends to bend rules even when iron hinges won't. Historians still argue whether these curfews were really enforced as strictly as the documents claim. Some say watchmen were easily bribed, others claim they were too lazy to bother. But the fear of the dark was real enough to keep most doors closed and bolted. Oh, and did you know some towns installed night stones just inside the gate? A small pit of hot coals, or an oil lamp that guided any late-arriving stragglers as far as the gate and no farther. It's basically the medieval equivalent of you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. You hear the low moan of the wind creeping along the rooftops, and you wonder for a moment what the streets must feel like now. Empty? Or filled with unseen life? Rats, obviously. Those are never gone. Cats, sometimes. And worse things, depending on what you believe. You recall a tale told by the baker's boy last week. A woman caught out after curfew, wearing red, walking barefoot. Some said she was drunk, others swore she was a ghost. A few claim she vanished mid-step. Either way, no one's seen her since. But they still talk about her. You wrap yourself tighter in your blanket and inch back toward the fire. It's low now, a dull orange glow, barely enough to warm your fingers. The curfew makes even fire feel riskier. Too much light, and your neighbours might knock, asking what you're up to. Why are you awake? Are you doing something unholy? Some people read if they're literate and lucky enough to own a manuscript. Others mutter prayers or whisper gossip under their breath. But most sit quietly, waiting for the time to pass, for sleep to come, for the world to forget them. And then, just as you start to drift, clang, 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 the watchman again, this time closer. You hear his voice ring out, 10 of the clock and all is well. You exhale. only now realizing you'd been holding your breath. For a moment, you imagine the town as a great beast, slumbering behind stone ribs and wooden skin, breathing in time with the wind. You're inside it now, safe in its belly. But the night is long, and the curfew is just the beginning. The stillness outside is deceiving. You may be locked inside, but just beyond your shuttered window, life is still loudly unfolding. Somewhere down the alley, a burst of laughter erupts, quickly followed by a thud and a shattering clay mug. Ah, someone didn't hold their ale very well. Again? You know where they're coming from. Everyone does. The tavern. If you're brave or reckless, you might slip out the back. Not every door is bolted, not every neighbor watching. After all, the tavern is the closest thing your town has to electricity, heat, noise, flickering torchlight, and questionable decisions. The door creaks as you enter, and every eye turns to size you up. Then just as quickly they lose interest. This is a place where you either belong or don't. You duck your head and make your way toward a bench near the hearth, hoping not to draw attention from the drunkards still awake enough to cause trouble. The air is thick with smoke wood, pipe, and something vaguely herbal. Not pleasant, not fatal, just part of the experience. A dog limps between tables, sniffing for crumbs. A minstrel plucks lazily at a stringed instrument in the corner, playing a melody that might have once been cheerful, but now limps along in 3 sad notes. The barmaid, broad-shouldered and barefoot, slams a wooden tankard in front of a burly man with a crooked nose and a laugh like a shovel in gravel. You're not here for the company or the quality of drink. You're here because in a world without light, taverns are one of the only places where you're allowed to be awake. Taverns weren't just for drinking. They were informal courts, rumour mills, job boards, and occasionally safe havens. Of course, safe is relative. One wrong glance and you could find yourself on the floor with a bleeding lip and someone else's shoe print on your chest. The local constable, probably at the same table finishing his pint. Historians still argue whether taverns were genuinely inclusive community centres or dangerous dens of vice, but you suspect the answer is simply yes, both, always. Did you know? Some towns had actual laws against singing too loudly in taverns at night. Yes, really. In 1364, London passed ordinances against noisy night gatherings in alehouses, especially those involving unlicensed minstrels. So technically the guy playing the lute in the corner. He might be committing a misdemeanor right now, but no one's rushing to arrest him. The tavern keeper pays off the watchman just enough to keep the place open a little past curfew unofficially. It's a dance everyone understands. The guards get their coin, the tavern gets its crowd, and the town gets just enough chaos to feel alive. Your drink arrives. It's not wine, not unless you've got noble blood and a purse to match. This is ale, thick, warm, slightly sour, brewed this morning in a wooden vat behind the inn, probably stirred with a stick that's also used to chase off stray cats. Still, it's safer than water, mostly. You sip, try not to grimace, and let the sounds wash over you. 2 men in the corner argue about taxes. Another claims he saw a shooting star and takes it as a sign of war. A woman in a patched cloak whispers to the tavern keeper, slides him something shiny, and disappears behind a curtain. You don't ask questions, and yet there's something oddly comforting about it all. This controlled chaos, this barely legal energy. It's a reminder that even in a world of curfews, candle rations, and locked gates, people find ways to gather, to drink, to flirt, to fight, to live. You catch snippets of a joke, the punchline lost in a roar of laughter, but it doesn't matter. You laugh too, not because it's funny, but because it's human. And for a moment, that's enough, until the door creaks open again. A man stumbles in, soaked to the bone, breathing like he ran from something. The laughter dies instantly. He mumbles something about shadows on the road and eyes in the hedge. No one laughs now. You hear the scrape of chairs, the shift in posture. Everyone suddenly remembers they're still medieval, still vulnerable, still one thin door away from the dark. The tavern keeper ushers the man to a bench near the fire and pours him a drink on the house. The lute stops playing. The only sound is the fire crackling and the man's shivering breath. You finish your ale quickly, set the cup down, and stand to leave. You've had enough nightlife for one evening. Outside, it's colder now, colder and quieter. The laughter from inside doesn't follow you. Instead, the wind wraps around you like a second shirt, and you hurry home, one hand on your belt knife. Tomorrow, you'll pretend none of this happened, but tonight you saw the world without its mask. You wake to the smell of hops. Not the gentle aroma of a craft Bruno. This is thick, yeasty, pungent, like someone mashed bread with a damp sock and left it in the sun. You're back at the tavern not as a guest, but in the back room, where the alewives work. She's already up, the alewife. Her sleeves are rolled, her hair tied back, and her face set with the determination of someone who's been up since before the roosters. She doesn't nod when you enter, doesn't have to. You're here to carry, clean, maybe stir if she trusts you. Alewives run this world in ways the churchmen don't care to admit. While monks scribble texts and lords squabble over titles, it's these women brewing liquid life into barrels with cracked fingernails and flour-dusted aprons. And when night falls, they run the taverns, they serve the labourers, they keep the town just tipsy enough not to riot. Historians still argue whether alewives were symbols of economic empowerment or scapegoats for bad beer and worse behaviour. But either way, they had power at least until the church or guilds got nervous. "Stir clockwise," she mutters, passing you a stick nearly as long as your arm. "And don't lean over unless you want to see your dinner again." You oblige. The bubbling vat hisses as you move the mixture. It's warm in here, almost unbearably so, and the low ceiling doesn't help. The steam curls up and wraps itself around your neck like a damp scarf. Out in the world, rumours cling to alewives like burrs on wool. They say these women use strange herbs, that they chant while they brew, that they whisper to the foam. One woman in the next village over was fined for using henbane in her batch. Another was accused of using a cat to stir the mash. Supposedly it gave her beer a bite. You won't find brewing with a familiar spirit in modern recipe books, but in medieval towns that was grounds for witchcraft. And yes, there's a reason witches in fairy tales wear pointy hats and stir cauldrons. Those were the public symbols of alewives. The tall hat made them visible in markets. The stirring? Just their daily work. Oh, and the broom? That wasn't for flying. It was a literal advertisement. Alewives would place a broom outside their door when a new batch was ready for sale. A flag, a signal. A tradition later twisted into superstition. She pours some of the mixture into a horn cup and sniffs it. "Still too flat," she mutters. "Another hour." She doesn't offer you a sip. Probably for the best. You're not entirely sure the inside of that cup has ever been cleaned. You step outside for air. The street is quiet, still dripping from last night's rain. In the distance, someone's already hauling bread to the square. A mule brays, a dog yawns, and somewhere behind shutters a baby starts to cry. In a few hours the tavern will open again. The same faces will shuffle in, coin in hand. Stories at the ready. Some will laugh, some will brawl. One might even sing. And behind the counter, the alewife will serve them, nodding just slightly as they thank her. But you'll know the truth. She brewed that pint in the dark, with the town asleep, while whispers of fire and witchcraft lingered like steam around her. And she's not afraid of the dark. She owns it. You wouldn't think toe tapping could get you fined, but here you are, trying not to move your foot too enthusiastically under the table. Across from you, a young man strums a few notes on a rebec 3 strings. One bow, a face that says he's trying to win someone's heart or someone's coin. Probably both. The room pulses gently with rhythm. Someone hums, someone else claps, and then you feel it again, your heel moving. You catch yourself and stop. Just in time, too. A town official in a rust-colored cloak lingers near the entrance, pretending to examine the firewood stacked in the corner. Hes not here for firewood. It's music night at the tavern, and that makes everything trickier. You see, dancing, especially after dark, was a magnet for trouble. Church leaders and city councils constantly issued bans, fines, and sternly worded decrees, not because people were bad at it, though some were, but because dancing had a reputation for loosening morals as quickly as it loosened hips. In some towns, even singing after sunset was considered suspect, particularly if the lyrics were lewd or if the tune was foreign or, God forbid, French. In fact, historians still argue whether these night music bans were aimed at preventing sin or just suppressing joy in general. Yet here you are, watching a woman near the hearth tap a spoon against her cup in perfect time. The man next to her sways slightly, a child claps, and, slowly, without anyone saying it aloud, the whole room begins to move, not dance exactly, just oscillate, shift, vibrate with something deep and ancient. The rebec player changes pace. He leans into a melody that sounds vaguely Eastern, and suddenly you're not in a tavern anymore. You're in a dream stitched from echoes. Someone stomps, someone laughs, a couple lock eyes. The city, for one short moment, forgets it's supposed to be sleeping. And then, just as quickly, it remembers. The rust-cloaked official clears his throat. Everyone freezes, the player lowers his instrument. The woman hides her spoon. A mug drops, cracks, spills. No one breathes. The official narrows his eyes. It's after curfew, he says, quietly. And I heard rhythm. No one replies. You could hear a feather fall. But instead of fines or fury, he sighs. Long and theatrical. Just keep it down. He turns and leaves, letting the tavern exhale again. You exchange glances with the others. For now, you're safe. But you remember the story of the village just over the ridge. A girl caught singing a troubadour tune after Vesper's public penance, barefoot through the streets, holding a candle and reciting Psalm 51. They said she sang under her breath for months after, and they said the candle never went out. Quirky fact for you. In 14th century Germany, there were actual lists of forbidden songs with titles like The Miller's Lusty Daughter or The Bishop's Boot. Some scholars believe these were early attempts at moral censorship. Others think they were just jealous they hadn't written better lyrics. Back at the tavern, someone coughs. The spell is broken. The music doesn't resume. Instead, mugs are raised, quiet conversations bloom, and the child is ushered to the back by a tired-looking mother. But you still feel it, don't you? The echo of that beat. In your bones, in your heels, waiting. Maybe tomorrow they'll dance again, maybe not. But even in the most rule-ridden town, music finds its cracks. And if you listen just right, you'll always hear it tucked between the silence and the sigh. You step outside, drawn by the dying heat of the tavern and the strange energy that always follows half-finished songs. The street is darker now. The moon is a thin silver eyelash above you, barely enough to see by, but you know the way. You follow the scent of burned resin and dried fish, and the faint clatter of goods being quietly unpacked at an hour when no respectable merchant should be awake. You're heading toward the shadow market. No signs, no lanterns, just the hush of boots on stone and an unspoken agreement. We don't ask names and we don't tell the watch. It's set up beneath the eaves of a crumbling cloister long abandoned by monks and now colonized by traders too strange or too desperate for daylight. A man in a green hood spreads out iron nails on a velvet cloth. Next to him, a woman sells powders in waxed pouches. Some are spices, some probably not. A boy offers frogs live ones in a basket, croaking miserably. You sidestep him. You know what you're looking for: a lamp wick, a scrap of wool, maybe some honey if it's not stretched with boiled tree sap. These are the small transactions of the poor, done under torchlight and nervous glances. A fun fact, in many towns these night markets weren't legal, but they weren't quite illegal either. Historians still argue whether city leaders tolerated them out of pragmatism. People needed things or out of profit. After all, fines could be collected, and occasionally bribes, a shadow tax, if you will. You duck into a makeshift stall, the canopy above made of patched sailcloth. The old woman inside doesn't smile. She just lifts a finger and shows you a jar. "Leeches," she whispers. "Fresh ones." You blink. You weren't looking for leeches, but here they are, squirming gently in dark water, already hungry. "Good for swelling," she adds, or hexes. You're not sure which she means. You don't ask. Behind you, someone sneezes and half the market tenses. No one likes a loud sound in the night. Not because of disease, though that's always a risk, but because the louder the market gets, the more likely it is someone in uniform will come walking by. The torches here are strange. Some burn blue, some sputter and smoke. One merchant uses a polished copper dish to reflect candlelight upward into his own face, making him look like a saint or a villain, maybe both. He sells dried mushrooms and vials of things that glow faintly green. You buy your wool, decline the leeches, and offer a copper to a girl selling roasted chestnuts. She gives you an extra one and says nothing. You nod. It's not a conversation kind of night. You might be wondering, why would anyone risk this? Because the night, with all its threats and whispers, also offers freedom. Fewer eyes, looser tongues. And in the dark, the lines between rich and poor blur just a little. The noble's servant and the baker's apprentice both want the same things: warmth, a cure, a secret to trade, a quirky tidbit. Some medieval towns issued night licenses to peddlers, usually widows or elderly men, letting them sell specific items after dark. But these licenses were rare and usually revoked after one bad rumor. One word witch and your business closed with your door nailed shut. You pass a man selling ink. Real ink in tiny glass pots. From raven's bone, he claims. Blessed by a bishop. You don't believe him, but for a second you want to. The torches start to burn lower. That's the signal. The market unravels itself in reverse. Stalls collapse inward, blankets are folded, goods disappear into baskets and barrels, then into shadows. No one says goodbye. The chestnut girl is gone, the leeches vanish, and you're standing alone on a street that 5 minutes ago pulsed with forbidden life. You walk home without lighting a taper. You know the way by smell, by sound, by the feel of cobbles underfoot. You pass the town square where a statue of St. Martin casts a warped shadow against the well, and you think to yourself, maybe you imagined it, maybe the market never happened, but you still have a chestnut in your pocket, and your fingers smell like wax and honey. You're almost home when the jangle of iron breaks the quiet. Clink, clank, clink, that dragging sound of authority. You freeze, half a breath, 1 second too long, and it's already too late. The night watch has seen you. 2 men approach, each holding a long pike. Their boots hit the stones in perfect rhythm. One carries a lantern that sways with every step, casting huge, lurching shadows that make the alley seem alive. The other squints at you like he's debating whether you're worth the paperwork. "Out past curfew," the squinter says. "Not a question. You consider your options, explain where you've been, offer a coin, run, which is stupid, or hope they're just bored. Your fingers move toward your pouch, but slowly. No sudden gestures. The lantern bearer lifts his light higher. Got a permit? A permit. As if anyone selling mushrooms by torchlight in a shadow market has a scrap of parchment with a wax seal on it. You don't, but you nod, like maybe it's in your shoe or under your hat. Lost it, you say. Weak. Classic? True. They sigh in unison. This isn't their first shadow dweller tonight, probably not even their third. Watchmen were the unofficial gatekeepers of medieval nightlife. Not noble, not quite soldiers. Somewhere between grumpy mall cops and legally sanctioned extortionists. They kept order, yes, but also kept secrets if the price was right. Historians still argue whether town watches were honest defenders or glorified bullies. It's likely both. It depended on the town, the night, and the bribe. You pull out a small coin. Not much. Just enough to say, I respect your authority and would very much like to continue existing. The squinter takes it. Go home, he says. Straight home. You nod. Try not to walk too quickly. Try not to look like someone who just paid to not be arrested. They watch you until you turn the corner. Only then do you breathe again. There's a reason some people say the watchmen are worse than the thieves. At least a thief does it honestly. No uniforms, no badge. You remember the story of old Janthy Cooper, who used to stay late at his workshop, fixing barrels by candlelight. One night, he stayed too long. The watch caught him, accused him of brewing illegal spirits even though he couldn't afford anything stronger than weak ale. He couldn't pay, so they took his tools. He never built again, but there are ways to make peace. Little offerings. Some folks leave a dried apple slice on the window sill. Others carve protective symbols near the doorframe, not against spirits, but against city guards with a grudge and too much time. Fun tidbit? Some towns had bellman watchmen who rang small handbells as they patrolled, not just to tell time, but to signal their presence to anyone lurking in corners, supposedly to deter crime. In practice, it just told you when to hide. You're nearly home now. The lantern light is gone. Your door still stands. You open it carefully, slide inside, and bolt it behind you. But the sense of exposure lingers, like you've been marked, watched. You light the rushlight again. Its small glow is suddenly precious. You sink down onto your pallet and stare at the floorboards, wondering if the coin you gave them will buy you peace or make you a future target. The night watch protects the town, but it never feels like it's protecting you. You're finally back behind your bolted door, but sleep doesn't come easy. Not tonight. Not when the wind sounds like it's dragging fingernails down your shutters. Not when the house creaks in all the wrong places. And definitely not when the church bell begins to toll, soft, deep, slow. Midnight, you count the chimes. 12, and silence. But in your town, the midnight bell isn't just for telling time. It's a call to the dead. You roll over and pull your blanket higher, but the stories start trickling in. Not ones you've heard from books, those don't exist in your world, but from neighbors, travelers, drunken cousins. One tale says the bell tolls to warn spirits not to linger. Another claims it's for the souls in purgatory, so they know we haven't forgotten them. And then there are the ones about the White Lady who walks just before the bell strikes, her veil soaked in river water, her feet never touching the ground. You tell yourself you don't believe it, and you almost manage until something taps your window once, twice, probably a branch, probably. You know how superstitions spread like smoke in these towns. Ghost stories are currency. A man sees a shadow he doesn't understand. It becomes a tale. A woman hears her name in the wind. That's a curse. And everyone has one cousin who swears they saw a horseman with no eyes riding through the fog. Historians still argue whether these tales were cautionary devices or genuine cultural beliefs, but honestly, you don't care. At night, truth doesn't matter, only fear does. You get up. You're not sure why, maybe instinct, maybe foolishness, and peek through the cloth over your window. Nothing but mist, and then movement. Down the alley, a small procession, four, maybe five figures, walking in single file holding candles. No one speaks, the flames don't flicker, even though the air is thick with wind. You press your face to the wood, squinting. The robes look religious, but you can't see the symbols clearly. They stop, right by the corner well. One of them turns slightly, and for a breathless moment, you're certain they're looking directly at you. And then the bell rings again, one soft chime, though it's not on the hour. The figures vanish, not with a puff or a scream. They just melt backward into the dark, like candle wax sliding off a cold plate. You pull away from the window and sit on the floor. Your heart pounds like someone's knocking on your chest from the inside. Time for a quirky fact. Some towns had what's called a dead bella special bell, rung only for deaths, funerals, or the very sick. People believed it helped guide the soul to the next world. But in your town, that bell rings when the veil is thin. And tonight, it's a wind chime for the beyond. You try to rationalize. Maybe it was a burial party, maybe a late-night monk procession, but no one carries candles that still burn in a downpour. No one moves like that. And no one looks back. You crawl back into bed and stare at the ceiling. It's low, and you count the knots in the beams to calm yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thump. From the attic. You don't have an attic. You pull the blanket over your head and whisper a name. Not a prayer, just your grandmother's name. It always made you feel safe. Eventually the wind quiets, your breath slows. The bell stays silent. And finally, mercifully, your eyes begin to close. But deep in your chest you still hear the chime. You wake to warmth on your face, not sunlight, not yet, but firelight, flickering through the last of the embers. And the scent in the air. It isn't your neighbour's turnip stew for once. It's saffron, cinnamon, roast duck, maybe even orange peel, which can mean only one thing. Somewhere nearby, a noble is feasting. You stretch, still groggy from the ghost bell dreams, and wander toward the narrow street behind the merchant square. That's where the big stone house is, the one with the carved lintels, the fancy iron gate, and guards who look like they're paid mostly to pretend they don't see anything. You perch near a rain barrel, just close enough to hear the clink of knives on pewter, the muffled hum of a harp, and the occasional burst of laughter, sharp, practiced, a little too loud to be genuine. The kind of laughter that says, "Yes, my liege, your joke was hilarious." The window above is open just a crack. Candlelight glows behind stained glass, dancing across the street like water. Inside, the nobles are halfway through the third course. You know this not because anyone told you, but because nobles always have at least 5. First the broth, then the fish, then the meat, and on until someone's corset snaps or the minstrel passes out. Historians still argue whether these nighttime feasts were displays of genuine camaraderie or simply performances of wealth and status. But let's be honest, if you had access to spiced wine and imported figs, you'd probably invite a few admirers over too. One quirky fact for you. Noble households often kept night banquets that lasted until 2 or 3 in the morning, complete with music, poetry, riddles, and even surprise appearances from jesters or trained monkeys. Nothing says I'm richer than you like a monkey in a doublet. You watch as a servant slips out the side door with a basket of bones and crusts. He dumps it in the alley without looking. Within seconds, a dog and 2 cats appear out of nowhere. You step back. You've never been inside that house, never will be, but you know it by heart. The great hall, with its tapestry-covered walls, always smells of smoke and clove. The nobles recline on benches draped with wool, sipping from cups made of glass as if it weren't one shattered mistake away from disaster. A lady plays a lute, her fingers soft and practiced, while the lord of the manor interrupts her to describe his latest boar hunt for the third time this week. At the far end of the hall, a monk scribbles notes in Latin, trying not to fall asleep. He's here to witness, to record, or maybe just to make himself useful enough not to be sent back to the cloister. Meanwhile, behind the walls, the kitchen staff moves like ants, scrubbing, slicing, sweating. You know their names. You grew up with one of them. He once let you lick a bit of goose fat off the carving board. You still think about that. A gust of laughter erupts from the window. A story's just been told, probably scandalous, probably fictional. But everyone's leaning in, holding their goblets just so, eager for the punchline. Nobles love pretending to be shocked by stories they've already heard. You wonder if they ever think of the town, of the curfew, of the man who vanished last week in the marsh, or if they believe their walls make them immune to everything but boredom. Another scent hits you, almond paste, maybe a tart. That's usually the fifth course. The harp grows slower. One guest snores, unashamed. The fire pops. You step back. You've had your fill. And yet, as you walk away, a voice drifts from the window, clear, high, and sweet. A young girl singing a lullaby in French. You don't speak it, but the tune tugs at something ancient in your bones, and for a moment you forgive them their wine, their monkey, their silver forks, because even behind stone walls people still sing to keep the dark at bay. You don't mean to pass that alley. The one with the red curtain fluttering behind a crooked wooden sign that never quite says what the place is. But your feet lead you there anyway, like they've done before. Like everyone's do, sooner or later. A faint golden glow spills onto the street, along with low music, the scent of rosewater and something else, something musky and warm, like beeswax melted on bare skin. You pause not because you're going in, but because the door is slightly ajar and someone inside is laughing, not drunken tavern laughter, but slow, syrupy, deliberate. This is not a tavern. It's a house of pleasure, a brothel. But here's the thing. This one is sanctioned, licensed, blessed even if you believe the rumors. Yes, the church frowned upon such places in public, but in private, some priests made excellent regulars. A fun fact? In medieval towns like London or Avignon, many brothels were regulated by city authorities and even had rules posted on the walls. Time limits, price ranges, hygiene expectations. Some places even required cooling-off periods between clients, a literal medieval version of resetting the room. You inch closer, not to enter, just to listen, just to remember. You once knew someone who worked there. Maren, she wore yellow ribbons in her hair and always smelled faintly of cinnamon bark. She used to say the house had its own heartbeat, that if you stood very still, you could feel it pulsing through the walls. You never asked what that meant. Inside, a lute plays. Two voices murmur. A woman recites poetry in a language you can't place. Maybe Italian, maybe made up. You catch a line. Your eyes are like coins lost and found. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds perfect. Historians still argue whether such brothels were havens for autonomy or traps of exploitation, but most agree they were woven into the fabric of nightlife, not hidden, not denied, just quietly accepted, like damp weather or bread with weevils. You've heard that this particular house pays a small tithe to the church each month for the souls of the fallen, supposedly. That makes it sound sacred, and maybe, in its own strange way, it is. You glance up at the faded fresco above the doorway. Venus on a seashell surrounded by swans. Someone's painted a halo over her head, another layer of irony or protection, hard to say. You step back into the shadows as a man exits, well-dressed, flushed, adjusting the front of his tunic. He hums a little, swinging a satchel in one hand. No shame, no secrecy. He walks like someone who's had wine, praise, and a good lie to tell tomorrow. Then a woman steps out to sweep the threshold. She doesn't acknowledge you, just shakes a bit of crushed lavender onto the stones and hums a tune as she works. Her dress is crimson, her sleeves loose, her face calm. You meet her eyes for half a second. Not flirtation, not warning, just recognition. People don't come here just for touch. They come for comfort, for escape, for forgetting. Some even come for love, though they rarely admit it. And despite the laws and the whispers, these places endure. Because in the dark, behind curtains and candles, people show their truest selves, shy, aching, hungry for something they can't name. You walk on, the music fades, the scent lingers, and for the rest of the night your dreams feel warmer than they should. The fire's nearly out again, but your stomach won't let you sleep. Not hunger, exactly, something stranger, a twist, a pull. You mutter a curse about undercooked beans, then reach for the pouch your aunt gave you last year. Inside, dried moss, 3 peppercorns, and a sliver of something that might be bark or might be toenail. She said it was for the gut demons. You don't question it. Instead, you toss the moss into hot water and breathe in the earthy steam. Bitter, acrid, but oddly comforting. This is your nighttime remedy. Everyone has one. Because if the cold doesn't get you and the rats don't, the cramps probably will. You sit by the fire and sip. Moonlight spills through a crack in the shutter. You catch your reflection in a pan of water. Pale, tired, maybe a little haunted. Behind you, the shadows twitch like they're breathing. Your mind drifts to the saints. The nighttime saints, the ones no one talks about during Mass. There's Saint Apollonia, whom toothaches fear, Saint Vitus, protector against seizures, and your personal favourite, Saint Zita, patroness of overworked servants and misplaced keys. But tonight, you're whispering to Saint Dymphna, who guards the troubled mind. And the moon? It's watching you. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually believed the moon caused madness, or whether it was a poetic way of blaming the world for what it couldn't fix. But moonlight had a reputation. Enough that healers made moon salvesa mix of goat's milk, rosemary, and silver filings used only at night, only on full moons. You tried it once. It didn't help your cough, but your skin did smell fantastic for a week. You poke the fire. Tiny sparks flit upward, then vanish. The drink is settling now, forming a sludge at the bottom of your cup. You drink it anyway. It's part of the process, like the ritual of unwrapping an amulet or whispering 3 times into the hearth before bed. Superstition? Science? Does it matter if it works? One quirky fact. Some people swore by onions under the bed to draw out illness. Others slept with bread crusts in their pockets to absorb bad dreams. And one particularly creative remedy involved rubbing garlic on your armpits during a lunar eclipse. You're not sure what that cured, but it certainly cured friendships. You think of the midwife down the lane, old, bent, sharp-eyed. She always knows when a fever's coming, says she feels it in her knees. She bottles moon cures in glass vials and ties them with twine. Last winter, she gave you one that tasted like ash and plum. You didn't die, so it must have worked. The fire is almost gone, just a red eye staring back at you. You lie down again, feeling the warmth of the herbs curling in your belly. Your fingers trace the outline of the tiny charm stitched into your tunic hem. A clove of garlic, a sprig of thyme, and a bit of parchment scrawled with a prayer in crooked Latin. You don't remember who made it for you? Maybe your aunt, maybe yourself. You close your eyes. Outside, the moon slides behind a cloud, and for a moment, the whole room sighs, the air settles, the house exhales, and the gut demons, they retreat. Somewhere far beyond your creaking shutters and half-dead fire, bells ring again, soft and rhythmic, like the gentle tick of a world you'll never quite belong to. Not the town bell, not the dead bell. This one is fainter, steadier, and somehow strangely peaceful. You know what it is. The monks are waking. They rise in the dark, always in the dark. At matins or maybe lauds, the hours blur together. Their schedule isn't ruled by sun or trade or hunger, but by prayer, by silence, by the constant rhythm of sacred time. You picture them now across the river or over the hill, in some half-ruined stone abbey that still holds warmth between its walls. Dozens of robed figures rising without speech, lighting tallow candles with practiced hands, feet bare or slippered against the cold flagstones. You've never been inside an abbey, but you've heard the stories, heard them from a baker's son who spent a winter apprenticing in the kitchen. He said the monks barely spoke, except in Latin, and even then only when necessary, that they sang in the cold before dawn, voices rising into the rafters like fog lifting from fields. Historians still argue whether this midnight devotion was genuinely spiritual or simply discipline wrapped in ritual, but you suspect it's both. In a world where chaos and fear snarl behind every door, the quiet predictability of prayer must feel like armor. The monks live in a different night. Yours is filled with flickering torchlight, drunken stumbles, the clink of coin and clash of knives. Theirs is candle-lit stillness, psalms whispered over stone, hands lifted in rhythm to ancient chants. You imagine their voices not grand or showy, just steady, deep, unshaken, singing things you don't understand but feel anyway. A quirky fact. Some monasteries trained choir monks to sing from memory, using medieval musical squiggles that look like tiny birds dancing on a page. It's said a monk could memorize dozens of chants this way, even if he couldn't read a word of Latin. You sit up a little, adjusting your blanket, as if that might somehow connect you to their peace. For a moment, you envy them. They don't worry about shadow markets or bribing watchmen. They don't lie awake wondering if that creak in the roof beam is a rat or a ghost. They've given up those kinds of worries and many others. Family, touch, freedom. But in return, they have this, a kind of structure that holds them through the night. A world ordered not by fear, but by verse. Of course, you also remember the story of Brother Anselm. He once snuck out during vigils to chase a fox, stealing eggs, tripped in the dark and broke his ankle. The other monks didn't speak to him for a week, not out of anger, but penance. Silence was the punishment, or maybe the cure. Some say he never spoke again. You lie back down and imagine the abbey bells fading into stillness. Somewhere, a quill scratches softly against parchment. A monk writes your name, though he's never met you, as part of a prayer for the whole world. It's possible. The candle in your corner gives a last flicker. You don't need it anymore. The monks are awake, so you can rest. Sleep finds you for a while brief, uneasy, like a visitor who won't take off their coat. When you wake, the fire is out, and the chill has crept back into your bones. Your toes are numb, your shoulders stiff, and the sound that roused you is still there, a low clatter, scrape, clink, splash. You groan and sit up. It's them again, the night soil men. You shuffle to the door and lift the corner of the shutter curtain, just enough to see without being seen. Down in the alley, two figures move slowly, purposefully. One hauls a wooden barrel strapped to his back, the other carries a long-handled scoop. Their boots leave wet prints behind them. One curses under his breath. You wince! Not at the smell, you're used to that, but at the thought of their night. These men, called gong farmers in some places and rakers in others, make their rounds while the town sleeps, hauling human waste from chamber pots and privies to the dump sites beyond the walls. Fun fact, in London they were only allowed to work at night, and by law they had to announce themselves with a bell or a shout. "Where below?" was the warning cry. Though in practice, few people needed warning. You could smell them coming. They're careful, these two. They wear waxed leather aprons and tie rags around their mouths. One has a cloth-wrapped hand, probably burned from lye, or maybe just raw from the cold. They don't speak much. You'd think people like this would be invisible, but you always see them. Everyone does. No one talks to them, though. Historians still argue whether these labourers were truly outcasts or simply unacknowledged heroes. Without them, disease would rip through the town like wildfire. But even so, they're avoided in daylight, touched only with coins dropped at arm's length. One woman claimed even eye contact could bring bad luck. You've heard rumours that some of them know the city better than the guards, that they've mapped every tunnel, every ditch, every hole where secrets are dumped. It makes sense. When you work in waste, you learn to recognise what people want to hide, and they're not the only ones prowling the night. As the rakers disappear around a corner, a figure slinks out from behind a barrel. Small, fast. You blink. Is that a child? No, too fluid, too confident. It's a thief. You spot the glint of a knife in his belt, though it might just be a tool. He wears soft boots, a scarf over his face, and moves with the kind of grace that only comes from hunger and practice. He checks a door, tugs a shutter, listens for breath behind walls. You know better than to move. The thief tests a latch your neighbour's house, finds it locked, moves on, and just like that he's gone, melted into the dark, silent as the shadow he came from. You press your hand to the wood, cold. These aren't villains from stories. No black masks or maniacal laughs. Just desperate people climbing walls, picking locks, checking for unlocked windows, while the watchmen doze off with wine on their breath. One quirky legend says that the best thieves were born on moonless nights and could speak to rats. It sounds ridiculous until you realize how often rats lead you to unlocked cellars and loose floorboards. You finally crawl back under your blanket. The smell from the alley lingers. So does the image of the thief's eyes clear, alert, resigned. This is the other side of night. Not music, not monks, not even ghosts. Just people surviving in the spaces no one else wants. You close your eyes, hoping that if anyone tries your door, they move on. Hoping the bucket you emptied earlier isn't full enough to slosh. Hoping the darkness is too tired to visit again. You're still awake when the scream cuts through the dark. Not the kind you hear in stories, long, blood-curdling, theatrical. This one is short, sharp, human. It freezes you mid-breath. Not a rat, not a creaking beam, something real. You sit up slowly. In the quiet that follows, you can hear your heart thudding in your ears. Then faintly, footsteps, running, then silence again. You don't move, your street is still. But something just happened. And in a medieval town after curfew, that something is rarely good. Maybe a thief got caught. Maybe a jealous husband returned home early. Maybe someone mistook shadow for flesh and acted before thinking. Or maybe it was something stranger. You shuffle to the window, fingers brushing against the frame like you're touching it for the first time. No one is outside, no guards, no neighbours, just the vague outline of the square in torchlight and the chilling sense that someone is watching, just out of sight. You think of the old punishments, the stocks, the pillory, the iron collar. Public shaming wasn't just for day. Sometimes they carried torches into the square after midnight, dragged the guilty or merely unlucky into the light, and made the town watch. Fun fact, in parts of France, townsfolk practiced charivaria, midnight ritual of banging pots and howling outside a home to shame someone for a moral offense. An adulterer, a second marriage too soon after a funeral. Even gossip could be punished this way. The noise was punishment. The darkness made it haunting. Historians still argue whether this was genuine justice or just communal cruelty dressed in tradition. But for the accused, it didn't matter. You saw one once, a boy no older than 16, tied to a post at dawn with a sign hung around his neck. Thief. No trial, just a missing pie and a neighbor's finger pointing. He didn't cry, not then, but you remember the look in his eyes, like he wanted the dark to swallow him. And sometimes it does. Back in your bed you hear the wind rattle something loose, maybe a bucket, maybe a shutter. Your breath fogs in the air, you wrap yourself tighter. Because you remember what your grandmother told you once, that in the middle of the night the world forgets what's fair. The rules that keep people civil in the sunlight, they dissolve in the shadows. Power shifts. The guards become gods. The priests become deaf, and the townsfolk, you included, learn how to look away without seeming like you did. One quirky belief that stuck with you: if you ever hear a scream and don't know who it belongs to, you're supposed to whisper, "Not mine, not mine, not mine," 3 times. Just in case the spirit tries to follow you home, you whisper it. Quietly, then again, just to be sure. Outside, a door creaks open, then shuts. No one screams this time. Maybe it's over, maybe it never happened. You lie back down, staring at the beams overhead, tracing the old marks carved into the wood. Not decoration, protection, a circle, a cross, a 5-pointed star. All things meant to keep the dark at bay. But tonight, you're not sure anything keeps it out. Tonight, the dark feels like it's already inside. You drift into sleep eventually, if you can call it that, more like a murky float down a river you don't remember entering. And in that river, things follow you. Eyes without faces. Howls from mouths that don't open. Dreams shaped like warning. And when you wake, it's not to the sound of a rooster or a bell, but to silence so thick it presses against your chest. You're not alone. Not in the supernatural sense, though, let's be honest. That's always on the table, but in the very real, very here kind of way. You hear it, hushed voices in the alley, the soft crunch of boots, the faint flick of flame striking flint. Someone's still awake out there, or more likely, gathered. This isn't revelry, it's not laughter or song. This is something older, something stitched from superstition and desperation. You ease toward the door, careful not to make the floor groan. Through a knothole, you catch a flicker of torchlight and a group of figures huddled tight, hoods up, movements rehearsed. Then you see it. The cage, not large, not made for comfort. Just iron bars hastily soldered and swung between 2 oxen carts. And inside, a figure slumped, barely visible, hair matted, arms bound. You don't breathe. The crowd isn't angry. They're quiet, watching. Some with arms crossed, others clutching charms or rosaries. This isn't about justice. It's about fear. You recognize the local priest. He murmurs something and lifts a cross. Another man, the town bailiff, holds a paper up and reads. His voice is low, but you catch the word demon and trial and witnesses. You've stumbled into a midnight inquisition. Historians still argue whether medieval Europe truly hunted witches with the zeal we imagine today, or whether those fears peaked later. But make no mistake, accusation and punishment in the middle of the night, that's always been real. A quirky tidbit: in some towns, people believed that werewolves transformed only under moonlight,
But demons? Demons didn't need the moon. They only needed doubt. And if your neighbor doubted you, that was enough. You've heard of these trials.
Not with judges and clerks, with buckets of water. If you float, you're guilty. If you drown, well loops. You can't look away. The accused shifts in the cage. It's a woman, thin, mud on her dress, no shoes. You don't know her name. You've maybe passed her once. Maybe she whispered too much to her cat. Maybe she brewed a tea that worked too well. Maybe she was just alone. The priest lifts his hand. Everyone bows their heads. And then the torch is doused. No cheering, no chants, just a collective exhale like something terrible has been acknowledged, contained, boxed up for later. They roll the cart down the alley, the wheels squeak. The woman doesn't cry out. They say the trial will be in the morning, but you know better. There won't be one. You back away from the door. You sit on the edge of your bed and stare at your hands. You've never cursed anyone, never mixed herbs in secret, never walked backward around the well or drawn symbols in ash. But you've thought things, hateful things, late at night, when the cold was worse than usual, when the bread was mouldy. Would that be enough? You blow on your fingers, they're shaking. You lie back down and try not to think about the face in the cage, or the silence in the crowd, or the faint smell of iron that's still caught in your nose. Instead, you recite a nursery rhyme, one your mother used to hum. Bread for the baker, light for the saint, dust for the liar, fire for the faint. You don't know what it means. No one does. But tonight, it's the only prayer you have. You don't dream this time, or if you do, you don't remember it. What you do remember is the sound of hooves. Steady, measured, travelling over stone. Not the clatter of a lord's procession, not the drunken sway of a merchant's mule, but the slow, deliberate gait of someone riding with purpose. At this hour, that alone is suspicious. You sit up, eyes adjusting to the blue-black gloom, and edge once more toward your window. The rider wears a cloak, hood up, face obscured. The horse is lean, tired-looking, its coat matted with dew and dust. A lantern hangs from the saddle horn, swaying like a pendulum, casting shapes on the walls that seem to crawl even after the light passes. You know what this is? A night journey, rare, risky, often regretted. Travel after dark is generally reserved for the desperate. Messengers bearing news of plague or war. Healers summoned to births teetering between miracle and tragedy. Thieves fleeing vengeance, or nobles with secrets strapped behind them like saddlebags. Most avoid roads at night. You don't just risk getting lost. You risk everything. Bandits, wolves, collapsing bridges, spirits. And if you believe the stories, strangers in black who walk with no feet and know your name before you speak. Still, someone always rides. Fun fact, medieval travel was measured not in miles but in days. A decent horse could cover 20 to 30 miles daily during daylight.
At night? Half that. And that's if your lantern doesn't go out or your mount doesn't throw a shoe. You watch as the rider disappears down the street and makes a sharp turn at the chapel. Then they're gone, swallowed by the dark, the sound of hooves vanishing like a dying heartbeat. You lie back, but your thoughts are already galloping down that same road. You imagine what could drive someone to risk so much: a dying child, a royal message, a forbidden lover waiting just across the border. Or maybe something darker. You once heard about a girl who travelled 3 nights in a row to reach a monastery on the coast. No luggage, no food, just a single candle she refused to blow out. When asked why, she said it was for her sister, who drowned in the mill pond but wouldn't stay under. The monks let her in. The candle never went out, not once. Historians still debate the accuracy of stories like that. But in a world lit only by flame and fear, a flickering candle can feel like truth.
Back in bed, you close your eyes and pretend you're riding too, not fleeing, not pursuing, just moving. Moving through pine-scented forests and mist-laced valleys, past crumbling shrines and roadside crosses, past the memories of places that never were. There's freedom in imagining the journey. The illusion that with enough speed and nerve, you could outrun everything that haunts you. A quirky tidbit? Some travellers carried bell coinstony pieces of copper with holes in them that chimed softly when you walked. They were meant to ward off spirits or alert others that you were coming, depending on who you asked. You think of that rider far from town now. Maybe they're crossing a bridge as the boards creak below. Maybe they've passed an old oak tree where candles sometimes appear with no hands to light them. Maybe they've stopped to rest, and the silence is louder than any storm. You roll onto your side, blanket tucked up to your chin. Tonight, you're not the traveller. You're the one watching from the window, waiting for hooves that might never come back. And somehow, that feels lonelier than the road itself. You're half asleep when you hear it, the sharp thump of something hitting hay. A whisper? Then a giggle. Not from your room, not from the alley, the barn. You push the blanket aside and creep toward the door. Not to spy, not really, just curiosity. After all, you're not the only one awake tonight. You step into the chill, breath puffing in front of you, and make your way past the garden wall, past the silent loom of your neighbour's shuttered home, toward the small barn where the animals are kept. But the animals aren't making noise tonight. They've given up their space to a different kind of visitor. You peek through a knothole in the wood and see them, two figures huddled in the hayloft. Close. Very close. The boy's tunic is loose. The girl's headscarf hangs forgotten from a beam. Their hands are intertwined, like they've been that way forever. They don't see you, and you don't stay long. This is not for you. This is something sacred, or reckless, or both. In a world where marriages are arranged before puberty, and affection is bartered like livestock, true nighttime meetings, secret ones are rare treasures, and risks. You remember when Margit, the butcher's niece, was caught sneaking out before matins. She said she was feeding the chickens. The bruise on her cheek said otherwise. No one fed chickens in their best boots. Historians still argue whether secret courtships were tolerated traditions or dangerous subversions of social order. But the truth lives in the cracks, in haylofts and root cellars, in love letters smuggled in baskets of bread and candle-lit glances exchanged across the chapel aisle. Fun fact? In some parts of medieval Europe, bundling was an actual tradition. Young couples allowed to sleep side by side with a wooden board between them and get to know each other before marriage. Of course, boards can shift. Blankets can slip. History, as always, is messier than the rulebook. Back in the barn, you hear a sharp intake of breath. The boy murmurs something. The girl laughs, a soft, bubbling sound that makes you smile in spite of yourself. For a moment, everything in this cold, hard town softens. You think about the risks they're taking if her father finds out. She's sent to an aunt's farm 3 villages away. If the church hears, she might spend a month in penance, scrubbing stones in silence while villagers pass judgment with their eyes. And him? Hell be called a beast, a thief, a liar. Even if he meant every word, but right now none of that matters. They're just 2 people, stealing time in a world that rarely offers any. You step back, careful not to make a sound. The barn stays quiet except for one whispered promise too, low to catch, too honest to ignore. You return to your door, colder than when you left, but strangely lighter. As if some burden not yours, but heavy all the same, has been lifted by the fact that love, however foolish, still dares to exist in this place. You lie down again, and this time, when you close your eyes, you see fireflies. Even though it's not summer, even though it's probably just sparks from your dream, the wind has shifted. You can feel it in your joints as you wake again, an ache, a tightness in your neck, the damp that slips in through the thatch and coils around your bones. Outside, something scrapes softly against the wall. You know that sound. Rain. It starts gentle, like the hush of cloth sliding through water. Then, slowly, it grows bolder, tapping on the roof, trickling down the window slats, dripping into every crack this town forgot to seal. You pull your blanket up higher and curl in tighter. But the roof above your bed has other plans. Drip. Right on your foot. You groan, shift left, but the blanket drags across a damp spot. You shuffle again, hoping for dry straw underneath, but the moisture has crept in deeper than you thought. It always does. You sit up, muttering half a curse and half a prayer. There's something about rain at night in these old towns. It doesn't just soak, it seeps. Into walls, into beds, into bones and dreams. And worse, it stirs things. You hear it now, low moans of wind pushing down the chimney. A shutter slamming 3 doors down. Somewhere, a loose cartwheel rolls, clangs and stops. These are the sounds that make old people cross themselves in bed. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're reminders. Reminders of what the dark used to be. Back before saints and curfews, these nights belonged to spirits. Rain was how they travelled. Wind was how they knocked. Thunder was their way of saying, "Remember me?" One quirky belief. Some villagers hung old keys from their windows during storms to lock the spirits out. Others placed bowls of salt on the sill to soak up evil before it reached the hearth. Salt, after all, didn't just flavour soup, it preserved the soul. You don't have salt to spare, so you mutter the rhyme instead. Rain from sky, stay outside, I give you breath, but not my bride. No one knows where it came from, but everyone knows it. You shuffle toward the fire long gone cold and kneel beside the hearth. You poke the ashes, pretending they might spark again if you just believe hard enough. They don't, so you settle for warming your hands on a mug of last night's tea. It's bitter now, but still warmer than the bed. A gust of wind pushes at the door, and for a moment you swear you hear her. Your aunt. Or maybe your grandmother. Or maybe a voice you've never truly met, but always feared whispering from the rafters, from the puddle near your boot, from the dark space under your bed. Tales say that on stormy nights the spirits of the drowned walk the streets, seeking names, not vengeance, just memory. If you speak your own name 3 times before dawn, they'll pass you by, so you whisper it. Once, twice, pause, a 3rd time. The wind falters, the door quiets, the dripping slows. Historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in these rain spirits or if it was just how they explained poor drainage and mildew. But you know better. You feel the stories in your knees, you sleep beside them, you breathe them like smoke from damp wood. You crawl back into bed not because it's dry, but because it's yours. The leak continues, drip, drip. But the fear eases, and you close your eyes to the sound of rain dancing on a world that still remembers how to tremble. You don't know what time it is anymore. Time bends oddly at night, especially in houses like yours, where no clocks tick, no lamps hum, and no electric sun rises from the ceiling. All you have is your body, and your body says, "Not yet morning." You're tired, but you're not asleep. Your mind is drifting, slow as syrup, through the folds of linen and straw. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows too early or too late. A dog barks once, then falls silent. The world is in that strange space between wakefulness and dreaming. And this right here, this stretch of foggy quietus, when the second sleep ends, you've heard the term, haven't you, the first sleep and the second sleep? Medieval nights weren't 8 hours of clean, uninterrupted rest. People went to bed early, sunset early, then woke for an hour or two in the middle of the night. To think, to pray, to talk, to, well, do other things depending on the company. Then they slept again. Historians have debated whether this segmented sleep was natural, cultural, or simply the result of boredom and darkness, but the pattern shows up in letters, in household logs, even in court records. He rose from his first sleep, they'd say, like it was a perfectly ordinary thing, because it was. You lie still in this liminal moment, listening to the sounds inside your home. A snore from the neighbour through the thin wall. The soft scratch of a mouse near the hearth. A rustle? Was that a dream? Your own heartbeat, suddenly louder than it should be. And beneath it all, that one thing you wish you could shut off. Your thoughts. They always creep in now. Doubts. Memories. Things you meant to do, things you didn't, the extra coin you took and didn't return, the harsh word to the old woman at the well, the bread you kept instead of sharing. No wonder the saints urge midnight prayer. You roll onto your back and stare into the dark. The ceiling is invisible. The room feels larger than it did at dusk, stretched by shadows and silence. You feel like a ghost haunting your own home. A quirky belief floats up from memory that if you speak aloud during this middle hour, your words carry more weight, blessing or curse, promise or secret. The dead, they say, listen during second sleep. You whisper nothing, just in case. You try shifting, turning your blanket, folding one corner under your chin. None of it works. Something in your body remembers comfort but refuses to return to it. You consider lighting a candle, but the last stub burned out hours ago, so you lie there, eyes open, mind full, and eventually the sounds begin to return. Faint movement outside, the first slow sweep of a broom in the bakery 3 streets down, a milk cart's wheels creaking as it rolls across uneven stone. The smell of yeast and wood smoke floats faintly on the air. Real smells, waking smells. You've passed through the second sleep, you just didn't sleep. Still you rise, because that's what people do. You put on your tunic, still damp at the shoulders. You rinse your mouth with bitter herbs, swipe a hand through your hair, and glance at yourself in a mirror made of polished tin. You look alive enough. And that's what morning requires. The dark hasn't left, but it's losing its grip. And somewhere behind the horizon, light stirs like a lazy god. You exhale, one long, quiet breath. It's not morning yet. But it will be soon. The candle is long gone. The fire's a dead memory. And outside, the sky is just beginning to smudge grey on grey, like someone rubbed the night with a damp thumb. No birds yet. No real light. But it's coming. You feel it before you see it. That heavy stillness starting to shift. You're already up. Not rested. No one really is, but upright. Alive. Breathing in the cold air of a room that never fully warms. You rub your arms and flex your fingers. They creak like old hinges. This is the hour of aching joints and whispered thanks because you made it. Another night survived. You stretch, slowly. The blanket falls to the floor, damp and smelling faintly of wood smoke and damp straw. You'll shake it out later, once the sun hits. Maybe hang it over the sill to dry, but not yet. Right now, you sit on the edge of your low bed and stare into the half-dark, your feet flat on cold stone. There's something holy about this moment. Not sacred in a churchy sense, no bells, no Latin, no incense, just peace. a few heartbeats when the world hasn't quite remembered to rush. Then the rooster crows again, and the town exhales. You hear the baker's shutters thrown open, the clatter of a pot in the next room. A door creaks on its hinges, a cough, a muttered complaint, the slow, sleepy sound of the world winding up, and still no full light. You move to the window, rubbing the fog from the inside with your sleeve. Outside, the sky is bruised purple. Somewhere behind that line of crooked roofs, the sun waits. You can't see it yet, but the air is different. Thinner, sharper, less haunted. You think of everything the night held, the watchmen, the lovers, the whispering monks, the thief with soft boots, the moaning wind, the voice under your rafters. Gone now. At least for today. Historians might write about battles and kings and treaties, but they rarely write about this, about waking, about the way medieval life did start with trumpets, but with a sigh, a cracked joint, a splash of cold water, a quiet resolution to do it all again. You dress, slowly, layer by layer, wool, leather, a belt pulled tight. You say nothing, but in your head a line forms, something you've heard from the old folks. The candle burns, the dark returns, but for a while we walk in light. And that's enough. You open the door, and the sky finally opens back. Now, the night is over. The torchlight has faded, the whispers have quieted, and the candles have long since melted down to stubs. The rain has passed, the dreams have curled back into their corners, and even the ghosts, real or imagined, have retreated beneath floorboards and behind forgotten doors. You've traveled through a world without neon, without screens, without alarm clocks or glowing exit signs. You've walked cobbled streets in silence, watched strangers gather in secret, and stood still as stories and superstitions passed like smoke around your shoulders. And maybe, somewhere in that dark, you saw yourself, hiding from the watchman, listening to forbidden music, whispering a name in the shadow of the second sleep. Now, let it go. Let the night loosen its grip on your thoughts. Let the flickering images of cloaked riders and barn dwellers and moon-cured moss tea drift softly from your memory. Let your breath slow. Let your jaw unclench. You're not in a medieval town anymore. You're here, wrapped in warmth, in this quiet room, in a moment that belongs only to you. There's no watchman coming, no trial, no locked gates, just the soft hum of safety. The slow, steady pull of rest, the promise of morning. So close your eyes, friend. Let the stories fold themselves into dreams, and if the night ever comes calling again, you'll know its shape, you'll know its song, you'll know how to survive it. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.